Hello, good morning, or good afternoon, wherever you may be. I'm Dave Rubenstein, Editor-in-Chief of SD Times, and I want to welcome you to today's program. It's called The Survey Results Are In, and Your Peers Are Using Usage Analytics to Build Better Products. Today, we'll be examining the results of an SD Times survey of software providers to find out if and how they use customer usage analytics to drive their product development. Before we get started, I just have a couple of quick announcements. Today's program is going to be followed by a live Q&A, so you can participate at any time by going to the questions panel in the control panel, clicking on, typing in your question, of course, and then clicking submit, and we'll get to as many as time allows. Second, the program is being recorded, and we will be available on demand from the SD Times website beginning tomorrow. You can look for it under the Learning Center tab on sdtimes.com. So joining me for today's presentation is Keith Fennick. He's the Vice President of Software Analytics at Revulytics. And Keith will be helping to bring some insights into the data that we're going to be presenting and explain what we mean by software usage analytics, and then he'll present a couple of case studies towards the end. Okay, so let's begin. Our study looked at responses from 284 respondents who work at companies that either sell software or use it internally or externally, and what they do with that customer data. It's an important topic, as we've been reporting in SD Times. And in fact, the research firm Gartner said that by 2021, 3/4 of software providers will rely on customer feedback derived from embedded analytics to make product roadmap decisions. So as you can see from the next slide, almost 40% of the respondents are C-level executives, and another 53% are project managers, architects, and engineering managers. This shows the importance of usage analytics to the folks in the glass offices. We then looked at what methods these software providers used to collect the data. A larger number of respondents relied on one-on-one type of encounters, such as support calls or customer interviews and feedback from the sales team. These tend to be qualitative in nature, though, providing important feedback, but these methods don't scale well and often will include a bias because, as we know, most people who call to discuss a product have a problem. Meanwhile, fewer respondents said their companies rely on advanced product usage analytics or telemetry, hello, thank you, telemetry from the product and surveys. So these are quantitative measures, as they can reach a lot of people, but often the information is received is as valuable as what they get in the one-on-one sessions, because by using product analytics, companies can see exactly how the customer is using the software, what features are important, and which aren't used so much. Keith, let me ask you here, what did you glean from these results?
Yeah, well, I mean, there is no denying that qualitative feedback is very effective, since essentially you are having one-on-one conversations with your customers, and during such conversations you can actually drill down into very specific issues, and you can also assess not just the issue itself but also the customer's perspective and how they regard your product. However, this is not exactly scalable, as you already mentioned. Like, with enough time and resources, you may possibly reach just a tiny sample of your user base. But anything outside of that small sample, you will need to look into other methods of data collection, which are typically automated. Now, when looking at these results, it is quite interesting to note how close the automated usage analytics comes to the one-on-one qualitative feedback options. On average here, we're seeing that respondents said there is a mere 10% difference in effectiveness. So what this tells me is that you can rely on fully automated and scalable usage intelligence without compromising much of the quality and effectiveness that people usually see from the qualitative measures, like having in-person interviews. And the benefit, of course, is that you can cover with the automated methods, including product usage analytics, you can cover your whole install base, which makes it much easier to identify trends on the large scale, for example, and also you can filter for bias or depending on the size of your install base, it doesn't really matter whether you have 100 customers or 1,000,000 users, because with an automated tool, you're not doing one-on-one calls, right? So it scales quite efficiently.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's great. Absolutely. So next in the survey, we asked who within an organization uses the customer data generated. And we found that a little more than 60% said software engineering, followed by product management, marketing, senior management, and sales. So to me, this shows a clear correlation between user feedback and product advancement. SD Times then asked what customer data is useful for, and nearly 90% of the respondents said feature prioritization or roadmap development. It is very useful. As the respondents were able to choose more than one response here, 80%, almost 80%, said UI UX design, beta testing, and software version decisions were driven by customer feedback. But surprisingly, as the next slide shows, only about 35% said their companies use customer data more than half the time to make product roadmap decisions. So Keith, what do you make of this slide? Why are the same people who say customer data is useful in several areas are not using the data to drive these decisions?
Well, that's a good point, David, because it seems people do realize that the data is valuable, yet it could be that maybe the data they have in hand is either not easily accessible, or maybe they are not comfortable trusting the data itself. Now, I have seen cases in the past where companies were uncomfortable relying on data they were collecting, mainly due to the data not being a true representation, or they did not believe that the data was a true representation of their whole customer base. Now, this could be the reason because the sample size was too small, or else maybe all the data was obtained from a subjective or biased source. For example, earlier in the slides, you talked about customer support being biased because only people that call in with problems are going to submit data. So this is where it is important to highlight the benefit of having a mix of qualitative and quantitative means of data collection that would be a more representative of the whole customer base. So use the quantitative approach to collect the generic data, and then maybe find a sample set and drill down into the details by doing qualitative either in-person interviews or maybe feedback collection or surveys to specific audiences.
That's great. I want to jump in and ask you a question here, Keith, and that is, how do you know that your sample size is big enough or representative enough to make these types of decisions?
Well, in reality, the knowing how much data you need or what size of sample you need is dependent on first of all, knowing how big your audience is, right? So if you have a product with 1,000,000 users, if you want to rely, for example, on a specific accuracy, 1,000,000 users, you can track them and sample them down to 100,000 users, right? So if you have a sample of 100,000 users, you can easily say that you have 99.9% accuracy or confidence, actually, that the data is within 1% accuracy, right? However, if you have 10,000 installations of your software, then you need to track at least 70% to get that same level of accuracy. So before you start, you need to technically try and analyze the real population out there, have at least a ballpark figure. And after that, then you can define what is the minimum sample size for me to achieve this level of accuracy. Now, it depends on the type of decision you're trying to make here. If it's a drastic decision that could negatively impact your customer base, if you take the wrong decision, for example, you might want a higher sample base, or maybe you want to focus more on the accuracy of your sample set. However, if you want to just, for example, take a decision of whether or not to pull the plug on an old version, then having 5% error rate in knowing how many people are still using that version wouldn't really matter as much. So the accuracy of the data also depends, not the accuracy, the decision that you're going to make depends on the accuracy of the data. So the more important decision it is, or the more it can affect your users, the more accuracy you should point to when choosing a sample set. And also, it's important to randomize the sample set, right? You don't want to be tracking just very closed group of people that might not be a representation of your whole install base.
Mm-hmm. Oh, that's excellent. Thank you. Okay, so back to the survey. We looked again at the next question. We asked about the kind of tools respondent companies are using to collect and analyze this product usage data. And we found that 37% had built their own solution, while another 21% said that they use usage analytics software. And another 17% said they have no tools and no plans to get a tool. And 10% said they don't have a tool but expect to have one in a couple of years. So respondents who are using usage analytics see significantly more value in using them across the activities, and so do those who built their own tool as well. So Keith, why do you think data is collected and not used? What's the point of that? And the other question I have is, why do some people see it as such a big project that it's going to take them 2 years to get where they want to be?
Yeah, well, I mean, in reality, building your own data analytics solution is quite an elaborate project. That is, I mean, it's quite elaborate to actually build it, and also it is very maintenance hungry. So you need the right resources and expertise in place before you can even jump into such a project, right? You also have to keep in mind that most companies, especially I'm talking like for those 37% or people who are planning to build something themselves, right? You have to keep in mind that these people are building products, they're building software products. So their core focus is on building the product. So if you're gonna pull a couple of engineers from building your product and ask them to build a call home system with an analytics engine behind it, whatever, it's like, that's not the core component of, you know, it's not their expertise. So they need either to learn or to do research on how things are done. I am totally not surprised by the 9% who say they are collecting data but not doing any analysis on it, right? Not using it. The reason is that data collection is the easiest piece of the puzzle. Having a scalable reporting framework that can transform the raw data you collect into actionable intelligence, that is where the major challenge lies. And this is especially the case when the data needs to be consumed by various people in your organization. What I mean is that it might be perfectly fine for an engineer to have to generate SQL queries to pull up some data, but do you expect the product manager or the C-level executives to do the same to answer a question they might have on the product? And this is where we typically see most companies struggle when building their own solutions, in the making the transformation from raw data to business intelligence in a way that is scalable and kind of scalable over time also, because, you know, your system might run fine when you have, you know, 1 terabyte of data, but then put in 2 years of data into it and the thing might blow up. So other than the technology itself, the reporting framework that you use needs to provide data that is digestible by different personas within the organization. Your product manager will definitely require different reports than your CEO, and your CEO will definitely need to look at different data than your head of engineering. So kind of you need to keep this in mind. It's not just about data collection, but about building a framework that can do analytics in a way that provides you with actionable content that you can decide and change your roadmap upon or take engineering decisions upon.
Mm-hmm. Excellent. So that ends the survey portion of the presentation today. And now I'd like to turn it over to Keith to take us through some of the real-world case studies so we can see how organizations are tackling the issue of customer data gathering, processing, and delivering insights. Keith?
Okay, thanks, David. So before we jump into the case studies, let me first of all quickly introduce Revulytics and our solutions. So that way the audience would know where the case studies came from. So Revulytics essentially offers software providers a cloud-based solution that generates actionable intelligence on the use and also the misuse of their applications. So our business is focused on 2 solutions. On one part, we do compliance analytics, which is the side of the business that is based on identifying software piracy and abuse, and turning that piracy and the abuse intelligence into revenue. On the other part, which is the part we'll be talking about today, we also provide usage analytics, where we help software companies track how users are engaging with their application and help them build better products that resonate with the audience, right? Because they can increase conversions, they can increase customer retention because they understand what the customers are doing with the software. Now, let's make sure we are all on the same page when talking about software usage intelligence. What is software usage analytics? Okay, so usage intelligence solutions are typically integrated into your product, and they, by doing this, they help you track how users engage with your software. Now, you can break it down in three components. You have the first component is the tracking piece, which is usually a call home type of system that collects raw data from your software and uploads it to some server. You have the visualization component, which is the component that helps you analyze the data and find out about trends, user behavior, differentiators across the different user segments, etc. And then you have the actionable component, which this can consist of several parts, like typically is the part that helps you build more context-relevant engagement process with your clients. And this can consist of, for example, pushing in-app messages to educate users based on what they're doing with the software, promoting features, collecting personalized feedback within the product, and doing A/B testing, for example, in an iterative development process. So the actionable component is what helps you use the data to do something about it. So essentially, overall, usage intelligence gives you a vision on the user's journey, both during the evaluation in the early stages and also throughout their life cycle. So every time they interact with your software, you know what's happening. If you had to look at it from an architectural perspective, you have typically you have the end users that are running your software. Every time they run your software, they're making call homes, they're collecting data into an online service, or it could be an on-premise service anywhere. This usually has a data analytics engine that transforms raw data into usage intelligence dashboards, where you can play around with the data, filter, segment, and query the data. So let's now look into our first case study. We conducted a number of case studies over the last couple of years with customers. So let's look at the first one, which takes us to a company who is producing a video editing product. Now, this company has several million active users using this product, and these guys actually implemented usage analytics to understand the evaluation process specifically. They wanted to see, they had a 30-day evaluation cycle, and they wanted to see what's happening during that phase. And they realized very quickly that by helping users engage with their product and its features, getting users used to using the product, and especially in the early stages, that will maximize the value that users get out of their product. And this had a very direct impact on their conversion rates. Now, they studied what users have done and not done with their software and used that data to build a strategy that helps customers in the onboarding process. Now, part of this strategy was to predict customers' interest in particular functions, whether or not they were interested in doing this kind of stuff with the software, and educating them, that is, hand-holding them, at various stages. And this is actually how they did it. So here's a screenshot of the actual products, right? So what they do is, when they detect that a user has not used a specific feature, they use in-app messaging to push an educational video, which is in this case part of their YouTube channel, about using that feature. So these guys happen to be using the Revulytics usage intelligence platform, right? So they know that I have been running the software for a week. They know that I have already saved 2 basic videos. And they also know that I used particular features in the application, some basic features, however, in order to build the videos. But they also know that I have never used their transitions feature. So this data-driven feature discovery process has several benefits, right? So what they do in this case, knowing that I haven't used the transition feature, they pop up a message with this YouTube embeddable how-to video of how to use annotations and transitions. And the benefits are that during trial, they make sure their users get to know about their killer features. So if this annotation and transition is something that their competitors did not offer, they want to make sure that I know about it if I'm still trying to take a decision whether or not to buy this product, right? So these are the ones typically that differentiate them from their competitors. And even after I purchase the license, they also make sure that users like myself get the most value out of what I paid for. So if I bought a license of the product and I know the renewal is coming up next year, the reason for me to renew the product would be whether or not I got any return on investment on this product in the first place. So what they do is they let users progress at their own pace. Like in this case, they first let me generate 2 videos before they popped up this more advanced feature, right? And what they do is, this is just one case of how they can increase their conversions and also their customer retention by showing me at my own pace the more advanced features within the application. So going to another case study, this case study is by a vendor producing building information modeling software. So this is quite a complicated piece of software used by engineers, architects, and installers of building subsystems, for example, the plumbing and electrics inside buildings. So before they implemented usage intelligence, this company had a lot of feedback coming from their support calls. But they also knew that they were just a very, very small portion of the real customer base, and feedback coming from support is not typically representative of the people who are most active with your software. It's only people who have encountered some problem usually. When they started the project, they wanted to get a better understanding of how usage of the product feature set was varying between the different construction businesses in various regions due to the local requirements, because different localities or different regions had different requirements, so people were using their software differently based on what the areas where their building construction was happening. Within a few weeks, they had identified some significant variances in how professionals in different countries use their product. And what happened is this allowed their product teams actually to start considering specific localization requirements in their new releases. So they actually now ended up with a detailed country release plan. So each country has a different release plan with different localization settings, etc. And actually this came out of them understanding that an architect in a state in the US was using their software totally differently than an architect in Germany. So this is how that ended up working. Now, their product also integrates a wide variety of rules. Rules are used for checking the accuracy and consistency of a building model, for example. And the company originally had their own beliefs of which rules provided significant value to customers, right? They thought some rules are more important than others, etc. However, through the Revulytics platform, they were surprised to learn that some of these rules, in fact, had surprisingly low usage. So their perception of what was valuable to the customer was completely different than reality. This particular customer also had another surprising revelation. As with the nature of most scientific or analysis software, they tend to be quite computationally demanding on the machine, right, on the user's platform. Now, their engineering team had loads of ideas they wanted to implement and wanted to do more with the software. However, they were always concerned and always, stayed one step back because they didn't want to increase the minimum hardware requirements for their software, which was already rather memory hungry. Now, with usage intelligence, they actually determined that these concerns were totally unfounded because in reality, their customers were running their software on machines that were far more powerful than the minimum requirements for the software. So this led to them supercharging their roadmap in the end by adding much more advanced and power-hungry features, which could help them stand out in front of their competitors. And also, they could do this without having to worry about customer machines not being able to keep up. So this takes us to another case study. Now, this particular product was a 10-year-old product. It was a very complicated CAD/CAM application. And this particular study helped us, helped the customer validate what customers wanted to do before doing a major improvement in the software, right? So they wanted to validate by monitoring how user behavior changed when they changed the UI. However, mistakes can be quite expensive to fix if you're doing a huge UI overhaul, right? Because you throw it out there, then you realize that customers are not really using it in that way, and you have to go back, etc. So this company is called Mastercam. So let's look at how they did this. So this is a very complicated UI. The software has been around for over 10 years. It has over 1,200 different functionalities, which are deep menu structures, etc. And the software itself had used the same menu-driven UI for the past 10 years. And several thousand people were already relying heavily on this software for their business, right? This is a B2B, obviously, B2B software, which costs, in the tens of thousands or more. So last year, the company was at a crossroad. Before adding any more functionality, they first wanted to simplify the UI. With all of its 1,200 features, they wanted to create a simpler UI without breaking the workflow that users were already used to. And just to give you an idea, this is what their software looked like. Okay, this is the version of Mastercam 7, which, as you can see, used a menu structure, used a lot of drill down right clicks to open context menus, etc. What Mastercam did is they analyzed what function groups their customers were using together and in what order. And they decided to go for a UI based on the Microsoft style ribbon interface. So the daunting task for them was to determine which of the 1,200 functionalities could be grouped together and which of them should be eliminated maybe from the new UI. So over the course of a year, they used usage analytics to study detailed usage behavior from the different user segments, and they deployed then a single version of their software with a totally new UI. And this is actually how the software looks like today. As you can see, they moved to a new ribbon interface, which is much more cleaner. And Mastercam here estimated that without using usage analytics, it would have taken them approximately 36 months to survey a good chunk of their user base, stagger all the changes over several releases, and trying to, in the process, meet the needs and requirements of all the different user groups that were using their software. With usage analytics, they actually did this in half the time because they could actually move away faster from the old interface without making any mistakes, such as grouping things in the wrong order, for example. And all the changes they've done in the UI was based totally on accurate usage data from all customers, not just a small sample of interviewed customers. Now, although this particular example involved a multi-million-dollar company, the same points would apply to smaller companies or smaller products. So for those of you who are interested to learn more about how to leverage usage intelligence more effectively to drive a successful project, feel free to follow the link on the slide, because it will take you to the case study so you can see the details and the thought process behind what Mastercam did, which was a very successful project relying on usage intelligence. So this brings me to the end of the case study. I'll pass it back on to David.
Yes, very good. Thank you, Keith. So we'll get started with the questions right now. So the first one is, how long should it take to start collecting data to start making these kinds of decisions?
Well, the duration of time really depends on what metrics you are collecting and how fast you can deploy your track solution, right? So if you manage to deploy tracking across your whole user base, typically within 2 to 3 months of data collection, you could potentially already start seeing trends and patterns starting to emerge from the data. If you are totally new to usage intelligence, what you will typically find is that the type and the complexity of decisions that you are doing on your product will change over time. As you become more experienced at understanding the data, you might you might first be asking simpler questions, and as you advance, you start asking more complex questions. So you start drilling down and being more adventurous. What you might probably see is that you will get your first aha moments even within the first month of data tracking. And obviously that would typically be the simpler type of revelations, but more strategic decisions would usually require a few more months of data collection. But we see a lot of customers who in the first couple of months come back to us saying, wow, we never knew that, our 30-day evaluation cycle was only being used for 1 day. We had customers who discovered, for example, within the first week of deployment that they had a 30-day period, but people were just evaluating the software for 15 minutes. So, that totally changed the way they were promoting their evaluation and trial.
That's great. Thank you. I'd like to remind our attendees that if they have a question, now is the time to type it into the question area in the control panel and hit submit, and we'll get to it. Okay, that kind of what you said segued into the next question very nicely, which is how much analytics do people need and what's a good strategy for getting started?
Well, for new users who are not used to using analytics or maybe are used to using web analytics but not doing analytics on the product, I would say the best methodology is using the crawl, walk, run. Okay, so I do not believe that if you're collecting more data, you're going to be more, a bunch of elaborate data are going to be more effective at using it. Actually, sometimes it's the other way around, kind of. If you're overwhelmed with collecting a bunch of noise and, think too big and immediately, then you end up with a bunch of data and you don't have enough resources or time to look into that data and do something about it. So I'd rather, usually when customers ask this question, especially in the very early stages when they're going about the deployment, we typically suggest that you start collecting the basic metrics, start understanding those metrics, and in the meantime, with every release, you always add more data collection, right? Now, with something like Reviolytics or an out-of-the-box package, the integration itself can be as fast as 30 minutes, but any more elaborate data analytics you want to do might take some time. So start small, make sure that the data you're collecting is actionable. Don't collect noise that you cannot do anything about. Before tracking anything, before you start instrumenting your application to track data, just always ask yourself this question. It's, will knowing this data, will knowing this metric, for example, help me in understanding anything? If it's just nice to have, whatever, but it cannot help you in anything, then it's probably noise. So when you start tracking the basics, you will always kind of come up with new questions and more elaborate questions that you might need to instrument different areas in your application to answer. So as long as you are always collecting data that is useful in some way, then that's the way to take it. So start small and add as you gain more experience. And obviously, it's great to have a tool that allow you to pull data upon request. Okay, so kind of having a tool that takes care of the data collection mechanisms, whatever, without you having to worry about building the whole mechanism, will allow you to focus on the actual data and the metrics itself, rather than the mechanism of how to collect it and present it.
That's good advice. Okay, so another of our attendees writes, you mostly talked about application monitoring, but what can Reviolytics do for a QA department looking to get into predictive or prescriptive analytics?
Yeah, well, that's an interesting question also, because with predictive analytics and tools that do predictive analytics, it typically depends a lot on heuristical data and trends over time. Like, so if you look at historical data and you see a trend, for example, that, let's say you're doing churn analysis or feature usage analysis, based on that, you will see that if you see that 60% of the users who don't use feature A typically don't retain your application, then that's a good prediction. If you want to call it predictive analytics, it's like a manual prediction of, hey, if people follow this trend, then I know that if I have a customer right now who has never used that feature, then they have 60% probability of walking away. So predictive analytics ties in well with historical analytics too. Now, with regards to the question, I'm not sure what the attendee means by by the QA department, if it's analyzing internal usage, or if it's analyzing or if it's using data to focus their QA team. Now, we had customers who use data from their existing customer base to, for example, understand which are the top 10 architectures I should focus my testing on. And if you only have 5 people running on old Windows XP, then you might not want to throw a QA resource to test your product on Windows XP, right? So, assuming that is what the attendee meant, then using architectural information of your existing install base or feature usage, for example, reports, you can focus your support and your QA training and your QA time on what matters most to your customers. And you can, obviously, we all know that it would be ideal to test each and every aspect of your application before every build or launch, but sometimes resources are limited or the deadline is too close, so you need to prioritize. And this is how you use usage intelligence to prioritize, by understanding, as soon as you throw your product out there, what is the percentage of people that are going to be affected by this bug, for example. This bug might be only occurring on Windows 7 with this particular service pack. Then you can literally use usage analytics to see how many people have that Windows version with that service pack, and based on that, you decide whether or not you afford to issue the product or launch the product with that bug, and maybe inform those handful of users that, hey, a hotfix will be coming soon, so don't upgrade yet. Or on the other hand, if you see that you have 50% of your customers who are going to be affected by an issue, then definitely you can easily take the decision because you're backed up by data to say, we're going to delay the release by a few days until we get this fixed.
Very good. Okay, so we have time for about 2 or 3 more questions, so I'll get right to them. Another attendee asks that in the presentation of the case study, the video case study, you mentioned the tracking feature usage. So does that raise any privacy concerns or issues?
Yeah, well, that particular case study where we're looking at users using what features users were using, that was all done totally anonymously. So if you look at like GDPR regulations, etc., what GDPR says, or what privacy regulations typically focus on, is not collecting any user identifiable information. Now, in the sense of GDPR, even the IP address can be considered user identifiable information, right? So you have to be aware that of what data is considered private, especially if you are tracking users located within the EU. Now, the OS is not usually as strict on such matters, but you cannot collect and store user identifiable information without the user's explicit consent. However, when we looked at the video project, the video editing application, they had built rules using the in-app messaging platform within Regulatics to say, if a user, I don't care who the user is running an evaluation, they haven't used the software for 7 days, and they haven't used feature A, or they have used feature A but not feature B, then show them this message. To do that, you don't need to go into any privacy issues, because you don't really need to identify the user. So you'll be very surprised to learn how much information you can learn from anonymous data, and that is why Regulatics is built primarily on anonymous data, and all the out-of-the-box reporting you get is totally anonymous. Of course, there's also the issue, if I want to add, of having the users, giving the users the ability to opt in or opt out of a tracking platform, which is also something that GDPR puts as a requirement. And this is typically done by all the major corporations, like if you look at Google Chrome or whatever, or Adobe products or Microsoft, you all have the question on during the installer or after the installer, which is, hey, do you want to participate in our customer experience improvement program? What that practically means is do you want to participate, or do you want to opt out?
Excellent. Okay, so another question came in, and it is, how how do you decide what to track and what not to track when you're implementing analytics in your product?
Well, this is a good on a generic level. The way I would tackle it is by asking, what is it that you want to achieve out of this program? So, do you have a conversion problem? Do you have an issue with churn rate, or do you want to know what features to focus on for your next release? Because depending what you want to achieve out of this will help you understand or answer this question as to what should I track or what should I ignore for now. The answer to such questions will usually give you a scope of what is important for you to track. What I typically tell customers is to start small, as we mentioned earlier, track the basic metrics, and increase the data intensity on a need basis. So what I mean is, don't bury yourself in too much data that it will become merely noise that you cannot consume, right? Keep in mind that your analytics needs will grow more complex over time. And they will definitely, the questions you are asking today will be totally different than the questions you'll be asking 6 months from now. So, taking such decisions taking decisions on the product roadmap might require you to track what features the users are actually using. If you're interested in churn analysis because you have a conversion problem, you might want to track the usage time, the runtime, how loyal users are to using your product, whether they use it once a day or once a week or whatever. Obviously, with something like Revulytics, that stuff is tracked out of the box, so you don't have to worry about it, but kind of what you want to focus on, even when you start collecting the data, would be based on what you want to achieve out of the program in the short run. And also you need to look at 6 months down the line, say, yes, after I sort out my conversion problem, I want to focus on the long-term roadmap. So let me track this, and that to be able to take the decision in 3 months' time.
Very good. Okay, looks like we've gone through all the questions. So Keith, I'd like to take this opportunity to thank you very much for helping us go through the survey results and understanding it, and then shining some light on how a couple of specific companies are using the custom use analytics in their product development plans. So thanks for being with us. Appreciate it.
Thank you, David, and have a good day, everyone.
Yeah, thanks. I'd also like to thank Revulytics for sponsoring today's program, and of course, thank all our attendees for joining us and staying with us today. And until next time, I'm Dave Rubenstein saying so long.